Hello. So here on gbnews, we have a group of middle-aged people complaining about tackling climate change, inspired by a recent interview of Tony Blair, where he suggested that it was not worth imposing extra costs on the road because China. So let's have a listen.
That's interesting that you've picked on the net zero story then in the Telegraph, and the fact that Tony Blair is now being outspoken on this.
Yes, it seems to be slight sort of muddled thinking from Tony Blair on this one. That he's absolutely right that when it comes down to tackling climate change, a small change in China would do far more than a big change in Britain. And what he's saying is, should ordinary Brits then face the burden of all the costs of trying to actually deal with global warming?
This idea is based on the statistics that in Britain we emit around 350 million tonnes of CO2 per year, where in China they emit around 11.5 billion tonnes per year. If you work this out per capita, we're looking at about 5.22 per person in the UK versus 8.1 per person in China. So China does emit more CO2 per person than we do. But there is a caveat to this. We are a service-based economy, while China are basically the factory of the world. So if we changed our lifestyle, how we live, what we use, where we get it from, and the West as a whole does this, then we can stop buying so much stuff from China, therefore reducing China's CO2 output.
I mean, the problem here is whether you believe in getting to the 2050 zero emissions target or not. And if you do, everybody has to play their part. So there will be a cost to us all. At the moment, ULEZ is the most controversial of all those things. But it's things like how you're going to feel if you have a wind farm on your doorstep.
I feel a lot better about having a wind farm than most of humanity dying out. I really dislike the aesthetics argument. It's like the planet is dying, but people argue that the solution looks ugly. It's just a stupid stance to have. Years ago, I was working as a solar panel salesman, and people would reject having solar panels on the basis that they look ugly. And I was always like, I've never seen a pretty roof. What are you talking about?
That's going to be part of the cost you pay. I just think that given that global warming is now the fourth biggest issue amongst voters in this country, I mean, first comes cost of living crisis, then it's NHS, then it's migration. And if they really care about it, we're going to have to get to the idea we are going to have to pay for it and suffer a little bit of disruption because of it.
But Tony Blair is saying what Brian is saying this morning, who's been in touch. Morning to you, Brian. He says we've produced less carbon since the Industrial Revolution than China has in the last 10 years. Everything we do is insignificant.
I bet you Brian's a Brexiteer. These are the same people who promoted the idea of a global Britain. The idea that Britain can be a world leader and pioneers and so on. But yet on climate change we are just a small, insignificant, unimportant island that can't change anything. We started industrialisation and played a massive role in ending slavery, and now we can lead the world on CO2 reductions. So stop talking Britain down, gbnews. Also, China does not exist in a vacuum. They're probably going to be more acutely affected by climate change in the short term than Britain. And they have also set targets to reduce their own CO2 emissions.
Yeah, nothing we do is frankly going to make any difference until China wakes up to this.
Well, I mean, it's absolutely right. It's a global problem. And the bigger the country, China, especially the industrialised countries, China, India, Russia, it is important that they do, if you like, more than we're doing. But if it's a global problem, we've all got to kind of do our bit.
Yeah, but all.
She said all. I think that maybe there's a slight xenophobic attitude here towards countries in the global south and the belief that they will not do their part or even try.
Well, yes,
Including those including the countries that just don't do anything.
As a staunch Tory.
It pains me to say this, but strangely I'm agreeing with Tony Blair, which I find quite a little disappointing this time in the morning.
But that was uncomfortable.
It was very, very uncomfortable because I do think that he has a point. That whatever we do in the United Kingdom, however fast we try and push it, if other countries in the developing world and places like China aren't doing their piece, then it's all for nothing. And why is it that all of these costs then come back down to the British taxpayer? And it's not just, oh, you put in a new heat pump, which is, you know, extortionate as it is, but there's no planning for any infrastructure. So if you're going to say, to make a difference, you need to have electric cars. OK, well, where's the infrastructure for charging? Well, it's not there, but we're going to charge you anyway, because we need other people to come on board. And you sort of think they're so confused in what they actually want to achieve at the moment.
Here we basically have a representative of the Conservative Party basically admitting the government is doing a bad job.
But they want us to pay for it anyway, that I think it's all backwards thinking. And for once, I think that Blair has a really, really good point, that until these other countries come on board, then whatever we do is futile.
I cynically believe these people think they will die before it matters. So why bother?